Canada is perhaps one of the most unique countries in the world. You will rarely find the country in world geopolitical reports. But in reports about a high standard of living, the country flashes constantly, quietly developing in the shadow of the older brother of the United States, which takes the rap in politics for the entire continent. But what kind of country is Canada, which ranks second in the world in terms of territory? Where did she come from? Whose descendants inhabit it? What did the ancestors of hockey fans do? Get comfortable, friends. In the next few minutes, we'll cover everything in a nutshell. And from you, by tradition, we expect a like and a subscription at the end of the viewing. Well, let's go to the distant past. For a long time, the dominant theory was that humans came to North America from Asia some 12,000 years ago. Siberia and Alaska were then connected by land, and the genetic analysis of the remains of the most ancient Aborigines from the territory of Canada screams about their relationship with Asians. In fact, two theories have emerged recently. The first is that Asians migrated to North America much earlier. In the north of Yukon, there are excavations of a 26,000-year-old human site, and some scientists are shifting the boundaries up to 50,000 years old, stating that people lived in present-day Canada for a very long time. Given the availability of archaeological evidence, this theory can be trusted. But I don't really want to believe in the second theory, which is now popular in certain circles. And all because it says that the Asians who arrived in North America were not the first people on the continent. Allegedly, Cro-Magnons, descendants of Europeans, already lived here. Thus, the Asian aliens drove them out. This point of view can now be heard in some forums. However, there is no good evidence base for this approach. Still, it is more correct to assume that the Asians were the first to settle Canada and North America through a land bridge with Alaska. Considering the Ice Age, this is a very serious achievement. In fact, 20,000 years ago, almost all of Canada was a continuous glacier, and the first settlers, having got to the continent by themselves, migrated much further south. A common misconception is that the Eskimos that still exist in Canada are the descendants of the very first settlers in North America. But in reality, according to most modern scientists, the Eskimos were among the last. But the first colonialists first went south, and then settled in the northernmost regions. Unfortunately, due to the lack of written sources, very little is known about their life. We only know that to say that the Indians did not go beyond primitive societies, to put it mildly, is rude. On the territory of Canada there were 12 language groups, 50 tribal unions and then their own semblance of an economy. The east of the country was inhabited by Hurons, Iroquois, Ottawas and other tribes who even managed to move away from the nomadic way of life to build villages for permanent residence. Supply was established between the settlements. There is evidence of trade, hunting and even farming. Before contact with Europeans, even a confederation of the Iroquois was established. There were 5 big tribes. Between them and other natives of North America, there were political tensions, alliances, and quite a large amount of trade. And even the first attempts at colonization by the ancestors of Canadians managed to be avoided. The Icelandic Vikings set foot on the island of Newfoundland in the 11th century, founding a small village there, the remains of which still exist today. Leif Erikson even named the continent Vinlandia. According to the analysis of wooden objects at the Viking site, it was concluded that they were cut down in 1021. However, they could not gain a foothold on the continent, and there is an opinion that they did not really want to. It is the Vikings, and not Columbus, that scientists now attribute not only discoveries, but also the first contact with the indigenous population of North America. Moreover, somewhere in the 11th century, the Vikings brought a woman from Newfoundland to Iceland. And her genotype is even now traceable in Iceland. That is, very distant relatives of this representative of the Indians live in the country, but otherwise, the topic of the presence of the Vikings in today's Canada is still being studied. There is also an opinion that we still have not found a real big village of guys. Well, if in an adult way, then they took up Canada and North America after Columbus' journey. In 1497, the navigator Giovanni Caboto proclaimed the new land the possessions of the English king and made the first map of the east coast. A little later, the fishermen joined the case. Basques from the north of Spain and the south of France began to fish and hunt whales already at the beginning of the 19th century, having founded a dozen outposts. They liked Newfoundland and Labrador, where the guys founded the village of Red Bay, a real metropolis of fishermen with a population of almost 1,000 people. But to Newfoundland, humanity owes the appearance of a not-too-good term, Redskins. Beothuk, a tribe that has inhabited the island since antiquity, painting their faces and clothes with red ochre. It was they who first met with the Vikings and one of the first with Europeans at the turn of the 15th-16th centuries. Because of the red ochre, an offensive nickname eventually stuck to all Indians, and the very word Indians also keeps a funny story. After all, Europeans discovered America in search of a way to India. So they called the first people they met Indians. At first, the Europeans were driven by nothing but research interest in fishing. They made maps, landed on small missions, and also looked for landmarks to facilitate navigation. But later, as you know, the colonial fever began. In Canada, it happened almost earlier than in the USA. In 1534, Jacques Cartier decently explored the new land, the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and eventually landed near modern Quebec. There, Jacques stuck a cross in the ground, declaring that now this land was the French king. A little later, Jacques Cartier met with the leader of the Iroquois, declaring claims to the territory. It was there that the word Canada was born. Jacques Cartier passed a pair of captured Iroquois and heard them say the word, Canada. In their language, it translates as, village. Jacques Cartier did not hesitate to name the whole territory in this way, and by the middle of the 16th century the word Canada appeared on maps, denoting the vicinity of present-day Quebec. Jacques Cartier did a lot more to explore the continent, even founding a couple of settlements and reaching modern Montreal. But the next milestone was the beginning of the 17th century, when the King of France gave French traders a monopoly on the fur trade. In this light, fur-rich Canada has become even sweeter. Despite difficult conditions, the French marched on the continent like a tank. Annapolis was founded in 1605. And already in 1608, Quebec, which was immediately made the capital of the New France. By and large, these were fur trade outposts. But already in 1615, the first Catholic missionaries arrived, and in 1617, Louis Gerber arrived in Quebec, who is considered the first settler in Canada not connected with trade and navigation. The country's Canadian history textbooks like to mention that unlike the United States, the colonization of Canada was not as brutal, which of course is not entirely true. Samuel de Champlain, who was the first governor of Quebec, established good relations with the Hurons and a couple of other Indian tribes. Strategic alliances were even concluded, but otherwise things followed similar schemes for the United States. At first they were friends with the Indians, then they traded, then they began to use them, and in the end they were evicted from the territory, since as the profitability of the colonies increased, they attracted the attention of the authorities. Along the way, the Indians were terribly oppressed by diseases brought from Europe, to which the native inhabitants of the continent had no immunity. Plague, cholera, smallpox, malaria and other joys of European life sometimes killed up to half of the population of Indian tribes. And the French were not much different from the British in the development of new territories. For example, they also converted the Indians into their religion. In Quebec, a college was even founded, where the Huron Indians went. But at the beginning of the 17th century, a third force stepped in. The good old English, who were not happy with the dominance of the French in Canada. The British took advantage of the internal squabbles of the Indians, as the Hurons did not get along with the Iroquois. The latter were made strategic allies, supplying them with resources. This led to a whole series of events. The Iroquois slaughtered the Huron Indians, and the Hurons slaughtered the Iroquois. And when the 30 Years' War began between France and England in the New World, it responded with chaos. In 1629, the Kirke brothers even captured French Quebec and controlled all trade for 3 whole years. Along the way, New England and Newfoundland were increasingly probed by the British, and by the end of the 17th century, their colonies were much richer than the French. The French did not doze off and even transformed the New France from a virtual private company into an official colony. But still, they could not equal the power of the British. The Londoners first founded the Hodson Bay Company for the sale of furs. Then they deepened cooperation with the Iroquois and supported the New France from all sides. In 1690, another attempt was made to capture Quebec. And even if the British failed there, after the War of Spanish Succession, their dominant position in the region was officially formalized. Well, when this 7-year war broke out, the New France was officially squeezed out. In 1759, 13,000 French and 9,000 English clashed at Quebec. Thanks to technical superiority, the garrison of Quebec capitulated and, according to the Paris Peace Treaty, following the 7-year war, all of the New France became known as the province of Quebec and was ruled by the British Crown. It is worth noting that the British tried to listen to the French population. And here they even restored French laws, although the criminal laws were still British. The British also allowed freedom of religion in the New World, and this entire set of laws went down in history as the Quebec Act, which is now considered one of the founding documents of Canada. True, it took only 2 years to rejoice at the New World Order. Already in 1776, the War for the Independence of the American States broke out, in which Canada happened to play the role of a key springboard for the British Loyalists. In parallel, American independence fighters did not hesitate to declare that in their plans to create the United States, the territories of Canada would be part of the new state. Ironically, being three-quarters French-speaking, Canada was in no hurry to gain independence from the English crown, as well as to cooperate with American freedom fighters. They tried to invade Quebec in 1776, but all attempts failed. Basically, because the large landowners and merchants of Canada were tightly connected with the British crown. It turns out that in the United States, merchants fought for independence from duties, having a large economy, and Canada basically traded one fur through England, so siding with the United States in a conflict was a headshot for big business. It would be better for Americans if the wealthy in Canada took a neutral stance. And with the peasants the situation was muddy. On the one hand, the lower strata of the population traditionally act as the engines of the revolution, and almost 1,000 Canadians actually signed up for the US troops. But on the other hand, this detachment quickly deserted, and in Canada itself, the peasants were reluctant to cooperate with the British. Which, together with the neutrality of capital, predetermined the tacit participation of Canada on the side of England in the conflict. And the war quickly moved to the south of the United States and became even more fun. After all, France supported the Americans by entering the war on their side, but ironically, even this did not change the position of mostly French-populated Canada. And when the US won, the province remained under British rule, sheltering tens of thousands of fleeing British loyalists from the American state. The only result was the division of Canada into Lower and Upper because of these same loyalists. For it turned out that the newly arrived Americans were not satisfied with the old French laws. Therefore, the territories where they lived were allocated to Upper Canada with the capital in York, which would later be renamed Toronto. And the places where the French Canadians lived will be called Lower Canada, the capital of which will be Quebec. The peace did not last long. Indeed, at the beginning of the 19th century, the Second War for Independence rumbled. Although historians called this war the Anglo-American War, in fact, the Americans wanted to expand their territories at the expense of Canada. But the British, in turn, wanted to make the United States their colony again. In this conflict, Canada got it, as events mainly developed on its borders. But as is often the case, in North America the only real victims of the conflict were the Indians. Regardless of their affiliation, all the tribes were resettled as a result of the war, imposed new laws and even more infringed on their rights. And the United States and Britain limited themselves to the status quo, that is, the initial state. From that moment on, they began to cooperate. Its result was the finalization of the current border between the United States and Canada, which dragged on until the middle of the 19th century. Well, the Canadians themselves moved west in between. After all, if anything, then at the beginning of the 19th century, Canada was not nearly as huge as it is now. It was a tiny province in the east of the continent. But in 1793, Alexander Mackenzie walked to the west coast of the country. In 1794, George Vancouver sailed there and began to explore Orleans. I think it's not worth mentioning which city will later be named after him. Maps, territories were actively drawn up, technologies were developed. And in 1836 Canada even launched its own railway. And everything would be fine, but the results of the Anglo-American War were still stifling. After all, Britain had forgotten the colonies in North America and did not follow the improvement of the administrative and legislative system. She simply pumped out goods and enriched the local kings, which, in the conditions of widespread progress, forced an atmosphere in society that cannot be called good anyway. After all, the majority of the inhabitants were still French, among whom dissatisfaction with the British administration was growing. Ironically, the English minority in Upper Canada held the same ideas. This resulted in the rebellions in 1837, which unfolded in both Lower and Upper Canada. They are usually divided into separate events, but now scientists still agree that the leaders of the rebels of Lower and Upper Canada cooperated and shared common goals, which they managed to achieve, though not by winning the rebellion. The rebellion just ended in complete failure. The new Governor-General, John Lambton, even advised the Crown to speed up the flow of British migrants to Canada in order to make the French a minority and end their unrest. But then something went wrong. The United States actively helped the revolutionaries. And the remoteness from the mother country did not make it possible to keep Canada by force for a long time. In 1841, Upper and Lower Canada were first united, believing that this would solve the problem. It did not turn out well, as the crisis forced Britain to increase taxes and Canada began to suffer losses. The United States quickly orientated itself and eventually began to supply goods to the country. In 1861, a civil war broke out in the United States, and Britain's attempts to intervene in it put Canada under the threat of invasion. The American government openly planned the attack to teach the British a lesson, and the people of Canada realized that it was time to get independence. In 1864, representatives of the British provinces in Canada met in Charlottetown to discuss the issue of creating a confederation. Britain warmly accepted the intentions, believing that the unification of the provinces would force them to pull less money from the budget of the mother country. In 1866, in London, they discussed the implementation of the idea. In 1867, Queen Victoria gave her consent to the British North America Act. What in fact created a confederation of Canadian provinces, which, by analogy with the United States, began with Quebec, Ontario and 2 other territories. It all ended with every single province joining the country in one way or another. The last province of Newfoundland ever visited by the Vikings held out until 1949. Actually, in this form, Canada exists to this day, counting down its Independence Day from 1867. Then finally independence still did not smell. Canada did not withdraw from the British Empire. She only got the right to choose her own government, make laws and engage in trade. But Canadians were still on the Crown's hook. However, for half a century, this did not prevent the happy representatives of the new country from doing their favorite thing, developing cold, and sometimes icy territories and joining all sorts of British Columbias. In the second half of the 19th century, railroads were built, gold rushes flared up, and Canada's industry finally flourished. Emigrants sailed into the country, as they did to the United States, exploring the prairies and digging for gold on the southern frontiers. The incomplete independence with the First World War echoed, into which Britain dragged Canada. Initially, Canadians gathered quite a lot of volunteers. But as the conflict dragged on, discontent in the country grew. First of all, discontent is connected with the unwillingness to go and die for Britain, thousands of kilometers from home. In 1917, a draft crisis erupted when French-speaking Canadians massively refused to join the army. The reason is simple. After all, the ruling minority was still English-speaking. French speakers at the front were sent to divisions, and the overwhelming majority of officers were English. Canadians were annoyed and caused serious riots in the country. As a result of the First World War, Canada lost 60,000 soldiers and another 175,000 soldiers were wounded. And finally, Canada realized that it was worth ending with half independence. Which is what happened in 1931. The Statute of Westminster, that is, an act of the Parliament of the United Kingdom, finally recognized Canada as politically independent from Great Britain and allowed her to conduct her own policy. True, the country still remained part of the empire. Which again led to a draft crisis at the beginning of World War II, though much less ambitious, because this time everyone understood the threat. 1 million Canadians took part in the largest military conflict in history. After that, the modern era of the country began, which was marked by the huge influence of the United States on life in Canada. They adopt culture, goods and holidays from Americans. Through controlled groups of people, they begin to influence politics in the second half of the 20th century. And as in the good old days, Canadians will try to get rid of influence, while still sorting out Franco-English internal conflicts along the way. Quebec will oppress the British by teaching in French. The English provinces will also be aggressive towards the French language, which through a couple of conflicts will lead to the establishment in 1968 of the official bilingualism of the country. Litigation in one language is also prohibited, and Canada is trying to learn how to balance the needs of the two population groups. True, even this did not suit Quebec, and over again it tried to secede from Canada. In the 1995 sovereignty vote, only a couple percent of the votes kept the province from independence, but even this did not prevent Canada from organically developing. The truth is still heavily dependent on the older brother in the face of the United States. However, this does not prevent Canada from constantly appearing in the ratings of a high standard of living and attractiveness for emigration. But the history of the country is an excellent proof that the modern world is not static. We are still resolving conflicts that started a long time ago and continue the work of our ancestors. In the case of Canadians, these are, for example, questions of territories. Until now, not all regions of the country have been named. Even on the maps, you can find the Northwestern Territories, which were last divided in 1999 and partially did not come up with names. Also, for several centuries the country has been solving the problem of the population speaking different languages. In addition to France, the United States and Britain, there are also Indians who have successfully mutated with representatives of all of the above races and also represent a separate political and cultural force. The modern world is not the pinnacle of history. We are just a part of it, and watching the process of change is incredibly interesting. That's all. If you were interested in listening to our chatter, we will be very happy if you like and subscribe to our channel. See you soon.